This video here small.
Okay, let's get started. I'm Warwick McKibben. I'm the Director of the Centre for Applied Macroeconomic Analysis here at the Crawford School of Public Policy, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today. I'd first like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people on whose lands we meet and pay respect to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to anyone online or in the room who are from First Nations peoples. It's a great pleasure to introduce my good friend, Professor Jong-Wha Lee. I think everyone knows who he is, but he's visiting Karma for a week and he agreed to give us a public lecture. And it's on a really important topic, Unveiling the Asian Century, Challenges and Opportunities. Jong-Wha has a very long CV. I tried to quantify a little bit what he's been doing, and he's got nearly 50,000 Google Scholar citations. Just to put in perspective, that he's a world-leading economist as well as being my co-author and friend. And he's very, very well known because of his work with Robert Barrow. He's almost as well known because of his work with me, but actually the work with Robert Barrow is exceptional. Now, Jong-Wha has a long CV. He's eminent professor of economics at Korea University. He served as the dean, simultaneously the dean of the College of Political Science and Economics and the dean of the Graduate School of Policy Studies at Korea University. He's also been previously the president of the Korea Economic Association, president of the Korea International Economic Association. He was a former senior advisor to the president of South Korea, and he was a Sherpa for the G20 for the Korean government. He was also chief economist at the Asian Development Bank and has had various jobs around the world, particularly at the IMF and university visiting positions. As I said, he's published a lot of papers. Whenever I tell anyone I've written with Jong-Wha Lee, they say, "Do you mean John Wally from Canada?" I said, no, someone who's published far more than John-Wha Lee. He works on a lot of different topics, human capital, economic growth, financial crisis, economic integration, and these are in the top journals of the world. So he's really an exceptional. He's won many prizes, but I think I won't take any more time and I'll hand over to Professor Jong-Wha Lee.
Thank you, Warwick. Very, very kind introduction, and hello everyone. So good afternoon. It's my honor to speak here today. So I just decided this title because some believe that the 21st century would be the Asian century, suggesting that the region will surpass the United States as the world dominant economic force in this century. So now we are almost past the 1/4 of the way into the Asian century. So it might be a good time to evaluate whether this is really we are getting into the Asian century or not. So today I want to evaluate the opportunities and challenges Asian countries face. So, okay, so let me just put down. Okay, so this is a snapshot of who I am. So, okay, so it should go up one time. Okay, so before I joined the ADB in 2007, I also had the privilege of serving as an adjunct professor here at ANU. He missed my career. That's why I'm emphasized. It was truly a pleasure to be here and at that time and also this afternoon. So I extend my gratitude again to Warwick McKibben and for inviting me, and each of you for joining us today, even on the online too. So today my focus will primarily revolve around the 4 issues. First is background, rising Asia, and the fundamental factors to contributing to the rise of Asia over the past half century, briefly on that, and then go to the explaining the challenges to Asia's sustained growth over the coming decades, and then move to the future of Asia, focus on the long-term growth of Asian countries, and then I'll summarize the opportunities and challenges for the realization of the Asian century. So let's start to the looking at the background of the Asia's rise. I think it's many of you are very familiar with that, but I will just quote a very long time ago. I'm not sure you recognize this map. This is very oldest map from the 2nd century. Yes, maybe people say this is the first map, world map. This is from the Claudius Ptolemaios Geography, this book. And he's a Greek Egyptian writer, geographer, and astronomer. So his map basically shows the Asia, Europe, and Africa. Even at the time, he believed that the Earth was flat. So, but he knew that the size of Asia was much larger than Europe, and of course there is no America at the time. So in this map, I'm saying it was there, but no one knows. So and then here, China actually covering big size of the Asia. So from the far eastward and southward. So today I'll just say Asia. That's basically referring to the Asia Pacific. So don't be annoyed if I just say Asia. Why I ignore Australia? But I just put the Australia here together. I'm sorry, let's put it down. So I'm trying to be on camera, so that's why I'm just staying. Okay, so the world has witnessed the rise of Asia's economic power over the half century, but people know this is not the first time Asia has been the dominant economic power in the world. People see this economic GDP, economic size measured by the GDP, and then they constructed this data, and then actually the Asia accounted for more than half of the world economic GDP since the 1970s. Until actually 1820, very recently, but over the 19th centuries, and Europe became the much larger, increased economic size due to industrial revolutions, and then there was 2 world wars. Then U.S. surpassed Europe. That's the summary of the history of the 4 centuries. Which we explain, I just explained briefly, and then focus on only the past half century. So this is the share of the world GDP. Here I use the measure by the PPP adjusted price, because you can use the market exchange rate, but the market exchange rate is fluctuating. So it's just to focus on the PPP adjusted GDP. Then China already surpassed US in terms of the economic size, and also Europe. So the share of the India also, ASEAN has also increased significantly. This is the current situation. So the important question is how these Asian countries, it used to be big, but over the past, until the 20th century, it was weaker, and how they could increase the economic size. Of course, if we measure economic size by the GDP, then GDP is coming from the 2 components. One is the population, and the other one is the per capita GDP. But the population, of course, has increased, but population has been always larger in Asian countries. So we cannot really see population as a dominant factor for rise of the Asia's economic power. So most important thing was the rise of the GDP per capita. So this is we call catching up of the Asian countries in terms of per capita GDP is also measured by PPP, adjusted price. So the black line is the United States, and then first this catching up started by Japan. That's the red color, and then there was the other Asian tigers, Singapore and South Korea, and then now the India and ASEAN countries. They are now catching up reducing this gap in the per capita GDP. So the important question today, when I get to the challenges to Asia's sustained growth, basically we focus on this rise of per capita GDP, whether China could increase its per capita GDP from current level to the US level over the next half century or not. This is the basic questions, and then what are the challenges to the Asian countries, not only China, but also many other countries. So before getting to these challenges, I want to just identify fundamental factors of Asia's success. Of course, you can say, okay, there are many other factors such as cultural factors, geographic factors, but usually these cultural and geographic factors have remained constant for Asian countries. So you cannot really say, oh, geography all of us became the important factor for Asia's jump in the late half centuries. So many economic literature basically looking at the fundamental growth factors that's listed here: favorable demographic changes, basically increased labor force, investment in human capital, especially education, and strong saving and investment rate, and high trade openness supported by export-oriented strategy. And Asian countries, relative to other developing countries, maintained macroeconomic stability and also with low income inequality. And there are less corruptions compared to for example, Latin American countries, and the quality of institutions was not very bad. So all these factors contribute to the strong growth of per capita income in many Asian countries. So this rise of the per capita income and the GDP actually contributed to the more rising presence of Asian countries in the global economy. Well, of course, Asia became the new engine of global production and trade and investment. Also this rising of income, as well as the middle class, increased the consumption power. And also they developed the technologies, becoming the new global innovation hub. But importantly, this I'm not really getting into this issue too much today, but this has also implications for global geopolitics. They're shifting the focus of the global governance much more toward favorably to the Asian countries. So there is Asia's power in global institutions and the governance systems has been rising. So there was a debate. Some believe that Asia's rapid economic growth and the deepening interconnectedness over the past half century marked the beginning of the Asian century. So there was a book produced by the ADB and other peoples. My own book said basically put the question mark. It was published quite a while ago. So some also pointed out this the 21st century is not really Asian century, it's maybe Chinese century. So economists put this article not just before the pandemic, saying the Chinese century is on the way. And or some other people also argue that, well, look at the China's growth is declining significantly. So yes, there was Asian century, but it's already ending. So Asian century disappeared just only after 20 years. Well, it's also many people saying that, okay, this is not really from Asia's rise, it's basically decline of the US power, this dominant power. That's a more important one in the global governance system. So I don't want to evaluate this. I want to just basically try to focus on more on the economic story here, what happened to the Asian countries' future growth. So I want to move to our attention to the challenges Asian countries facing. So how can I just identify some factors which contribute to Asia's sustained growth? The question is whether Asia could maintain those fundamental growth factors, which I call in that way, in the future. So what are the challenges if Asia really wants to get into the Asian century? So let me just start from this public lectures. I don't want to put any equation. So it's basically showing the production function equally. So okay, so what should the Asian economies do to sustain strong growth? Well, they must improve four major growth factors. This is human resources, physical capital, technology, and institutions and policies. They are all interacting each other, but we can focus on the four growth factors. And then there are also these Asian countries must also effectively respond to the domestic and external economic and geopolitical changes, like trade, conflict, also global financial instabilities and some big movement in the through the population aging process. So there are big topics. I cannot really get into the details on some of my research only focus on the one topic here. So actually I'm really give broad pictures. So here the question is what the Asian countries can overcome those challenges. Here I list the challenges here. Population aging and decline, and decreasing rate of return to investment, which will slow down the physical capital accumulation. As we can see, this significant rate of return decline in China, especially in the housing sectors, and the slow pace of the catching up and convergence, which I will explain, and the challenges in technology adoption and innovation, and rising income inequality, and inefficient institutions and populism. And the external environment like US-China conflict, geoeconomic fragmentation, and environmental climate changes. So let's talk about the demographic issues first. So we can see the working age population has been declining. So what's the problem here? Because the Asian countries maintain strong demographic dividend over their high growth period. You can see the working age population, the share has increased over the past half century until the early 2020. And then it has maintained in the high ratios, and then now start to decline in many countries, even in China. This is the current situations. So that they will hurt this labor force. And then this very accelerating speed of aging is evident in many Asian countries. This bar length shows how quick Asian countries are really getting into the aged society and super aged society. So that's the current situations. And so, of course, I mean, I have another paper, actually, the working paper, common working, claim that all the workers not necessarily be less productive, but in most cases, the aged people are less productive. So it will hurt economic growth. So demographic issues are very important, but today one issue I'll emphasize is even though demography is very important growth factors, it not really dictate the future of Asia, because as I'll show that the physical capital accumulation and technology progress could be more important than demographic change itself. Of course, the demographic change could also change the physical capital accumulation, technology progress, but they are impacted. But we can see that sometimes how policy and other factors could play the more important. So I'll get to this rate of return decline, how it works for the Asian countries. So this is the slightly complicated chart, but it's from one of my other papers. So you can see how China's growth path has been changing. That's in the red color. That's actually what the point here is. Basically, I'm trying to show China's growth pattern is a bit like what happened in Japan and Korea in the past. So the graph compares how much these countries grew over 5 years. So each point shows the 5-year average growth rate. So vertical axis shows per capita GDP growth rate, and the horizontal axis is per capita income at that time. So you can see first look at Japan. What happened? Japan is this blue color. The growth rate has been declining over time, over five years. Where you can say, oh, that's because of the lost decades or whatever. But look at Korea. What happened? Korea and China, of course, at the beginning, when they implemented serious reform and opening to the global market, their growth rate all of a sudden jumped. So they maintained this high growth rate. But South Korea, look at South Korea. It's a black color. It has been declining over time. It's really getting into this Japan's path. That's what happened. So, well, China may not want to follow these countries' path, but if we look at this path, actually going closely, similarly to what these countries went. Of course, there are some time difference. So China's path is the lag about 20 years compared to the South Korea because their per capita income is lower. So it's quite natural for China to have the slow growth over time. This is the basically coming from the textbook. But when I applied these numbers up to here, when I presented this paper in China, they were very upset because we can maintain some distinguished Chinese scholars always say, oh, we can maintain this growth. This is only 8% growth per year. It's not a big deal, but of course you can increase growth rate by really stimulating accumulation of physical capital. But the rate of return has been declining. So if we are just leave it to the market, it naturally should slow down. Government could do, but it created a lot of problems. So this is coming from the convergence theory. I'll not explain a lot, but it's basically the rate of return would be higher. The country has a smaller capital stock. So initially the investment will increase and growth rate will be higher. But as the nation develops and approaches its state level of per capita GDP, growth eventually slows. So also technological gaps. Initially, the countries can develop technology by imitating and also adapting advanced technologies. But if your gap becomes smaller and smaller, you need to really work hard or spend a lot of money to imitate the foreign technologies, or you should get into the real innovation stage. It's much more difficult. So what I'll do into the model, I will not explain a lot about my model. That's also in the Gamma working paper, but basically it's trying to fit this kind of convergence story to explaining the historical data over the past decades, and then trying to get some parameters and then apply the parameters over the next past half century, and then what will happen to China's growth. So, and then put some alternative scenarios to see the differences. So this is another challenge, whether this country can avoid this convergence phenomena. Of course, if they really get into the technology innovation, really improve institutions. Otherwise, it will be difficult. Okay, then this technology issue. Okay, why not develop the technology? Because these countries are really developing the technologies very well. So Asia has become the world technological manufacturing hub. As you know, the many Asian countries has developed the world leading presence in areas such as very important consumer electronics and industrial electronics and electric vehicles and semiconductors. So for these areas, basically, Asia account for major portions of the world 3,000 top technology-related companies share in global revenue, R&D spending, and patents. This is from the McKinsey report, very recent report. And on semiconductors, which is very important items, South Korea and Taiwan are global powerhouses in the production of advanced chips. Okay, so, but Asia is not really technologically self-sufficient. And the country is not really getting into the critical foundation technologies. So even though the China and advanced countries here, the Japan, the Korea and Taiwan, Singapore, these countries spend a lot of money for technological inputs. This is R&D spending or scientific technological articles. They lag behind the United States, even in size. And also the productivity of R&D investment. There are some measures. Actually, is much lower than the United States. So this is a big challenge for them that they could improve this. And one big issue for Asian countries, it used to be a very equal society, but income becomes more unequal since the 1990s and 2000s. You can see the Gini index has been increasing in the many Asian countries. So this is a rising income inequality, of course, especially coming from the inequality of opportunities in the society. It's not good for the social justice, but also in terms of the economic consequences, this unequal income distribution usually harmful to the economic development because it hurts human capital development because they cannot really raise the good quality children. And then also sometimes it increase very unproductive government spending to support the poor household. And also often create the more populist policies So I get to a little bit these institutional issues on the populism. So we see there's some measures in the rising support for populist parties. So populism can be defined in many ways if you are familiar in this literature, but usually they try to categorize society members into two groups, pure people versus corrupt elite. And populism appeals to the public because they are very frustrated with the corrupt establishment and economic and social disparities. So that's maybe have some consequences in the politics, but also in economics. Usually these populist policies just prioritize short-term gains over long-term consequences. So it hurt the economy over the long. So especially if they impose some, as in the Latin American countries and also in the recently in the United States, they restrict the trade and also restrict immigration. And that's the usually very well-known populist policies. So now we see that in the world, we call the economic nationalism and the geo-economic fragmentation. So this has been arising because why? Well, politicians choose these policies because the public's view on employment and distribution effect of globalization is often very negative because the trade hurt our wage, trade basically took away our jobs. So US and Europe have moved toward protectionism and economic nationalism, not just restricting trade, but also immigrations. And especially US and China trade and technology tensions have escalated. So we had a great aunt lecture 2 days ago. So basically people say, okay, this post-war liberal international economic order is in crisis because US especially switched to the other directions. So it led to we call now geo-economic fragmentation. Some of you are familiar with these terms. Well, it used to use the countries use the military power to enforce some other countries to do something. But now major powers use economic tools to advance geopolitical objectives. And geo-economic tools are quite powerful because now countries are very closely tied. Or other my counterpart, these countries, which I don't like, very unfriendly to us, maybe just rely on my currencies, my markets, and then I can use that as a weapon to impose certain things. So this geo-economic fragmentation has been intensified in recent years. I'm not just saying this was only from the western part of the world, but also China used these tools to increase their power in the so-called southern part of the world. So geo-economic fragmentation now has led to the reshoring, nearshoring, and friendshoring, that's whatever you call, changing the cross-border trade and financial flows. So I'll just give some data because nowadays many papers are looking at this issue using very micro level data. So this is what happened, what US has been doing. US is calling as the so-called de-risking. And so because of these protectionist policies and also this de-risking by the US-China trade has declined in terms of share. You can see that especially strategic goods sectors, significant decline of the Chinese share between over 5 years, you can see. But some other Asian countries here, Vietnam and Taiwan, have increased. So this is a reallocation of the trade flows in the world. And the idea here is that even the FDI is the same. So basically, we don't, those countries, the United States and Europe, don't want to rely on the unaligned foreign suppliers, especially in China. So you can see the significant decrease in the capital flows too. So what will be the consequences of this kind of the geo-economic fragmentation? So not just the US and China, let's say other countries just go to the US-led bloc or China-led bloc, what will happen to the world? So this is getting into the more complicated story here. So let's assume that the many countries are trying to strengthen their so-called friendly shoring, so go to the more align their trade with friends, especially they call sharing similar values, so political proximity. So how we could measure this political proximity? So researchers, it's a long time. I have also used this kind of data 2000 as my one paper in the JME. So researchers often use data on bilateral UN General Assembly voting. So General Assembly voting could go to the sometimes insignificant agenda, but you can identify some important agendas and then see how much they closely voted together. And then you in this McKinsey report basically put the geopolitical position in the 10 scale, and US is 0, so one end, and China is the other end. Actually, the number is 9.6. So they are far away from the geopolitical positions, and Western Europe is close to the US. Not surprisingly, Australia is almost 0, and Japan is here, South Korea is here. South Korea is sometimes abstaining the voting on the North Korean agenda. So that's why then you can see that many Southeast Asian countries and India are actually close to the China. So world you don't want to divide into the two, but what's the current situation of the trade? If you calculate, what they did is to calculate the trade value weighted geopolitical position. Then US position is around 4, because US is also trade with the very geopolitically distant countries, in this case, China and other countries. And then Australia is actually almost similar to the China, because they trade a lot with China. So let's say if they reallocate all these flows, US will go down and Russia, other countries will go up, and then it will be disaster. It's a significant reallocation in the world. So intensifying geo-economic fragmentation over next decades, if it happens, is expected to reallocate global trade, not just get trade, but also investment flows very significantly. So especially if you look at the trade flows at this stage, of course, the US and China are two of the major poles in the global trade, and the global value chains are quite linked among these poles. So if they try to get the distant, it will hurt the global trade. And then global trade is, reduce global trade will hurt all the countries in not just Asia, but also global economies. So I'll get to this point and then show the one measure done by the ADB, not ADB, IMF later. Okay, so I just explained what the US has been driving this geopolitical fragmentation, and what will happen in the future. There's some predictions made by some international organizations as well as private institutions. But what really China has been doing? So of course, China understands that this trade and technology conflict with the United States will hurt China's economic and technological development. There is still a significant gap in the per capita GDP between the US and China. So China is responding very cautiously, in my view. Chinese government is also working very hard to revive its economy and also develop its own technologies. China is rapidly developing the cutting-edge technologies, as you know, the big data, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles, and batteries. I visited one Chinese university last December. They all use the face recognition technology. But you cannot get in to this university. I'm surprised. So I always should be guided by someone, otherwise they cannot recognize my face. So surprising. So we cannot introduce the technology to Korean universities, and people complain. Many people do cosmetic surgery and then they cannot come. So what the US reduced of course this trade with China, but also that's also happened to China, because this is what happened to the China's trade with other countries. This is the geographic distance, so it's how close geography. So China is close to the South Korea, very near country neighbor, but they decreased their trade with these countries, and of course with the US, because geopolitical distance is big. with these countries, but increased ASEAN countries and Russia. I don't know. I mean, this is the temporary phenomenon or the permanent phenomenon, but everyone says US would not change its policy against China for a while. So it may continue over time. So China may continue this policy. But one issue is if you are familiar with the literature, this is from the US side, this may be the dilemma because the US reduced the direct import from the China, but the US increased the trade with ASEAN countries and Eastern Europe. And China's trade with these countries has increased. And then China also invested more in ASEAN countries and Eastern European countries. So US indirect import from the ASEAN has increased. So in total, it's just the same. It has not changed at all. So US exports to the China, it will just remain the same. So I don't know how US could decrease this really indirect and indirect exposure. That's another issue. But the China's also financial side, China also continue to reduce US Treasury holdings. You can see the data, how it has been changing. And China also now strengthened their effort to the renminbi internationalization. So I don't have time to go deeper, but this settling mechanism, they use the renminbi, that's called CIPS. This is Chinese cross-border interbank payment system, has been increasing. So as of January 2024, the whole participant in the world is 1,492 from the 113 countries and the regions across the world. So it has been rapidly increasing. China, of course, trying to use the Chinese renminbi for transactions. So again, I mean, so what will be the consequences of this friend shoring? Well, people say, okay, especially in the US, this will be good for the United States, but this is done by the IMF. There are many papers on this issue, but all depending on what kind of scenarios you are assuming. So it's the kind of hypothetical. But one interesting thing is even in 2003 was very interesting because the IMF put into this scenario, fragmentation scenario, that says, okay, the world could divide into the three blocks. One is a US-led bloc, China-led bloc, and then non-aligned bloc. And then put the EU could be non-aligned, but also US blocks. India and Indonesia may remain as a non-aligned, but will go to either way. Southeast Asia could be a China bloc, and then that will go either way. So this kind of, and then actually their estimations, if between the blocks, if they impose some barriers, actually it hurt all countries. And then there are significant uncertainty and risks. So we can see the papers, basically the huge decline in the global GDP. So basically the world needs to avoid these geoeconomic fragmentations. So let me get to some future of Asia in the next 50 years. I'll get to some quantitative analysis and then trying to explain a little bit on my interpretations. So I'm going to show some predictions about how much the economies of major Asian countries. I cannot predict all of the countries, but China, Japan, India, Indonesia, and Korea. I regret I should put Australia here, but I didn't do that. But Australia is already advanced economy here, so you don't need to look at them more carefully. So, and the US up to the 2070. So basically, this is again going back to what are the fundamental factors of economic growth. So labor force and human capital accumulation is basically the educational payment and physical capital. You can also emphasize the health and technological progress, so-called measured by total factor productivity growth. So there are four components. They are interact each other, but how you build some model, small scale model, and then the population is just coming from the exogenous. This is following the UN population projections. You need one exogenous factors. And then all other factors will be determined by some equations. Okay, so investment equations, technology progress equations. Then there are two scenarios. One is a baseline scenario. It's basically follow convergence theory and historical data. So either it will gradually decline over time. Alternative scenario is assuming that this country can maintain the higher growth factors and go on the much higher growth path. So, but again, I mean, there are a lot of limitations in this kind of projections. Of course, there are a lot of risks and uncertainties. Economic crisis could happen in any of these countries and have fundamental, it has long-term impact on potential growth. And there will be disruptive technologies. AI could change everything, so we don't know. So changing the economic policies and institutions. And I didn't really get to the new industries and old industries and changing the industry issues. So, of course, we should exercise caution when interpreting these predictions. So I put into the 2070 as the end of my forecast. I thought I could put 2050. That's dangerous. I may still arrive then. People say, okay, although your prediction was completely wrong. So 2070, I should be over 100 years old. So it should be safe. So okay, let's get together in the 2070. So this is you can see you may say, okay, your gradual decline of growth rate may not be the right way to focus the world. But it's, reality, if you can see that these countries, if you only focus on this here, it's going down, or if you do some 5-year moving average, actually many countries growing down. You may be surprised that my predictions actually showing that the India growth rate will be higher than China. But you can see over this period, Indian growth rate is much higher than China and Indonesia. But some issues here, again, I mean, industry issues, India's manufacturing share is much lower than the China and other Asian countries. It will hurt the Indian economy or not. I mean, that's all depending on what kind of technology will be developed in the next half century. But anyways,
So you're assuming these countries are all islands? Each country is an island?
oh, okay. That's an interesting issue. Okay, no, it's in terms of technology. There is again, this convergence theory is that these Asian countries will adapt the US technology. So there are some links, but we are not really getting into if one country got into the shock, and then what will happen to the other countries. So there are, in the paper, in the revision, we said we can look at much more carefully about this interlinkage. But these people don't need to look at my paper. They can just look at the volume materials, book and paper. So it's a small scale is my advantage. I just go. And then this one is you can exercise and put some numbers, and so it's much easier. But
I can't see this picture properly, but
Mm.
if I go to 2020 and fold the paper over, I get the same future as the past. Is that roughly right? That looks roughly right to me. Right, the bottom line's on the bottom, the top line's on the top. The US, yeah.
Yes, you mean the
So what this forecast says essentially is you're predicting exactly what happened in the past.
Yes. Historical past is basically
That's what
the baseline is
it comes up extremely clearly.
exactly. So baseline picture is will not change because especially in these developing countries, convergence theory says Indonesia, India, China's growth rate will be higher than US. That's true.
Yeah.
That's we cannot really change that. So if otherwise, it will be very surprised.
This is more of the same, basically.
Yeah, but before getting to the predictions, I want to just to show very briefly what happened to the past decades. So this is one way to look at the contribution of each productivity inputs to the GDP growth. That's what we call growth accounting. Then, of course, there are interactions, but let's just stick to this growth accounting approach. Look at China. China's GDP growth rate was per year, annual average was 7.7%, very high numbers. But what was the major factor for growth factors? Total factor productivity, that's often criticized as residual, but it's captured some technological growth and productivity growth. That was 2.4% per year. So contribute to the 32%. And the physical capital, 4.6%, so 59.5%. So physical capital accumulation and total capital productive growth contributed a lot. During this period, labor force was a very small contribution, only 1.1%. So one of the reasons why I started to think about this project, whenever people say, okay, China's population growth will decline, so China's future will be not as bright as before. But it's even in 2000 and 2007, 2010 and 2019, their labor force growth was just minimal, but they could maintain 7.7%. So all discussion is should be on this side. What happened to this component for the China's growth in the future? So India's case, 6.9%, and also physical capital accumulation and total capital productivity also contributed a lot. I mean, so this is the US also well known. This is the TFP growth was very important. Okay, so then I just looking at again demographic changes because clearly there are some important assumptions here. Working age population growth rate will continuously decline, but China, India, Japan, China, Japan, South Korea, it will be negative. Population will decline, working age population decline. But for other countries, even though positive, the growth rate will decelerate. So it will be the big challenge from the demographic side. So it will give the adverse impact on the GDP growth, of course, but we need to evaluate all other components together to make accurate predictions. So that's the point. And then just I'll give some numbers. Okay, that's the dangerous, I know, but anyway, we need to put some numbers. Okay, so I'll just focus on the baseline, which is basically following the historical pattern. So technological progress pattern is basically coming from what happened in the advanced countries, and then also technological diffusion. So China's growth rate was the 7.7%. It go down 4.1% from the 2023 to 2050 on average. The significant decline. So China's growth rate will be eventually 4% on average. 2051, 2070, because the working age population growth rate will go deeper and deeper down, it's only less than 1%. That's the baseline predictions. So China's growth rate will become, again, because we are relying on history, it will become like Japan. Not now, but over time. So this is the prediction. India is a little bit bright, but it will go to slow down from 2% growth and 2.6%. Here, per capita GDP growth rate a little bit better because the population growth is negative. So it's even though Korea will suffer from the negative growth, but very low growth, but per capita growth is better. Okay, so what is the alternative assumptions? Again, alternative assumptions, again, there's a higher technological progress and then saving rate will not decline significantly due to the policies. Then China could maintain 4.7% growth, but still it's not really high numbers and going to the 2.5%. So my prediction is these countries will grow between these two numbers. So it gives a number of ranges. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with these Indian numbers. Actually, it's a big range, but that's the India case is the more uncertain. But let's see this growth rate. If you accept this growth rate as is coming from the model, but of course their assumptions are important. Then what will happen to the future? So here, I want to just, you can focus on this solid line. Solid lines baseline scenario. This is the black is the US. This is per capita income, and it's measured by the PPP adjusted price and constant price. So if you are really interested in what will happen to the market exchange rate, we need the assumptions, what will happen to the PPP parity, something like that. So it's more complicated. But anyway, just put the current price as a fixed, and then the country will grow. Then China's growth rate, real GDP per capita. This is the US case, and this is China's case. So it's okay for China, even though China's growth rate is declining 4% and 0.9%, they're significantly reduce its gap with United States in per capita income. It's almost get the 90% of the per capita income of the US because the current growth rate is much higher. They can maintain 5%, 4%, 3%, unless they got just collapsed. So China's long-term interest is just maintain steady growth rather than just trying to stimulate the economy to increase growth rate to the 5%, 6%, 7%. Even 2010, when I was ADB's chief economist, I wrote actually, so there is the black hole. I asked the Chinese government to just focus on the maintain the 6% growth over the next decades and then slow down to 5% and focus. Gradual decline is better than adjustment. But at the time, even Chinese government, many scholars say China should focus on the 8% growth. That's overheating the economy because the rate of return has been declining naturally. This is India's case, significant change. But let's assume the extreme case. US just maintain this baseline scenario. Of course, the US could go to this alternate. China could maintain alternate scenario. Their per capita income will surpass the US level. Of course, in the PPP, just the price terms, even before the 2060. India, if we could grow part of the alternative scenario and China could maintain just the baseline scenario, it could match the India's India could match to the China in the per capita GDP. So basically, the key point here is that the future is not predetermined, basically. So even though I said I'll give the forecasting is just giving the wide range, and it all depending on how they change the policies and institutions, how much they could stimulate the technology progress and physical capital accumulation, maintaining the productivity of capital investment, even given this declining population and declining working age population. So this is the GDP projections was interesting thing is that, of course, in the PPP terms, China is ahead of other countries. But if India has been rising, and if India could follow alternative line, then it will be very close to the China's size. So there will be good issue is the Asia will have two giant economy. Maybe a pessimistic prediction is that there will be more increasing conflict between two big Asian countries and then more tensions within Asia, not just with the United States or outside the powers in Asia. Okay, so let me summarize the implications of these predictions. Okay, so it's almost guiding. Okay, so I'm saying that the simulation results show significant slowdown in the growth rate of Asian economies, but the decline in labor force growth and aging population do not dictate the future of Asia. If they could adopt the better policies, this alternative scenario shows that they could increase their economic size, and also they could increase their global influence. But the world could go to another direction, it intensifying geopolitical risks globally, and the US, in the baseline scenarios, these Asian countries cannot never surpass US per capita income. US will remain as the hegemonic power. We didn't really get to financial power and other powers, but they will maintain strong hard and soft powers. So let me get to the final conclusions here. Okay, so let me summarize my address by answering these questions. Will the 21st century be the Asian century? So basically, we can identify many opportunities for Asian countries, but also there are challenges. There are continuous increase in income and middle classes in the region, strong investment in science and technologies, enhancing the competitiveness, and the West dominance will decline continuously. Strong intra-regional trade networks, increase in power of India, ASEAN, and the latecomers in these regions. But there are challenges, exactly, from the global protections, geopolitical risks, and still gap in the technology innovation. And the lack of institutions for cooperation in Asia, and economic and political diversities between countries, there are constraints. I'll focus on these two issues briefly and then get to the conclusion. So this is the rise in the Asia's economic integrations. If you are not familiar with these numbers, over the past 50 years, Asian countries become more and more integrated in trade and investment. So-called intra-regional trade share among the Asian countries, Asia-Pacific countries, almost 59%. It's close to the Europe. But the China plays very important, significant role here. Without China, it's much lower, 39%. So China is a major trading partner of all Asian countries. So, oops, sorry. I put down the. And there are significant constraints to the Asia's cooperations. Okay, so GDP and per capita GDP are quite diverse. So it's not as homogeneous as European countries. And that sometimes they have a different national interests. And the weak institutions for corporations, a lack of strong political leadership here, heavy dependence on the US and Europe for not just for export markets and other important matters like the security and defense, we all know, and the rising nationalism and territorial dispute in Asia. So there is no united Asia, of course. This is the still challenging. And we could see rising rivalries and tensions among the Asian powers in the coming decades. So we need more, these cooperations could be more and more important. But will it happen? Well, this is showing some data, and this fragmentation, especially this now coming geo-economic fragmentation, poses significant challenges. So economic side is blue bar. Trade shares, you can see with China and with the US, both countries rely more on China than US. Actually, India is the exception. India is equally rely on the two countries. So India very neutral on that. But also, if we look at this political proximity measured by the UN board, you can see the Australia, Japan, and South Korea is always aligned with the United States more. But if we look at the other countries' numbers, heavily more aligned with China. So even India too. So these countries will be more aligned with China. So and there are some institutional memberships. The last one is maybe interesting because sometimes people don't trust this UN voting because that's not is really significant. One measure is if US and China heavily trying to work harder to persuade other members to vote one direction, what will happen? So this is what happened in the October 2022. This is a UN vote, UN Human Rights Council vote. There was that's basically they would put this discussion on the human rights situation in the China's Xinjiang autonomous region should be on agenda or not. It's not actually really getting to any resolution. And then the voting was very divided, and then it was actually the motion failed. You can see how divided here. Japan and Australia is not member at the UNHR at the time, but Japan and South Korea was of course supported that, but India abstained, and then Pakistan voted against. So you can see how these countries were divided, and also Indonesia voted against it. So let me conclude. This has been the long and broad topic, but my conclusion is basically the couple of things. Basically, Asia's future is not predetermined. It's depending on the policies and the future policies, especially adopted by the government, and then what will happen to the corporations among the countries. And its baseline prediction is basically Asia's economic power will rise over time, and then reshaping the global economic and geopolitical landscape. So the question is which direction they will go. Well, it could evolve into the more balanced multipolar era, or we could really see the significant instability and risks among the countries in the world. So that's but what Asia should do, I think still, well, that was my first job at the ADB. when I moved from the university, build the Asia's corporations. I still believe they need to build the more robust and effective regional cooperation mechanisms to avoid significant escalation of the conflict among the Asian countries, at least for that. That does not mean, they are isolated from the United States or isolated from Europe, but it's just build the cooperations among the regional countries. And that's the important area. Okay, so let me stop here. So time is up, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thanks very much, Jong-Wha. That was very broad and very interesting. We can take questions from the board. Indicate you want to ask a question. And Bob?
When I think of the Asian century and China's growth rate slowing down, I go to conferences. People implicitly put up the factor share table that you put up in terms of growth, where most growth is generated by capital accumulation. I think it was half, if I remember rightly. And then they say, oh, the problem with China is that savings is too high, got to change the economy, the capital share has to fall, essentially, what I'm saying. You place no emphasis on that at all. In fact, you sort of said that will go on the same rate. Do you feel comfortable with that idea? Because I'm sort of worried about that. I don't see why the Chinese are going to save less. And then I look at all the buildings and the roads, and I sort of feel as though the physical investment is coming towards an end. So that's the main reaction I have. I give it a general, that part worries me for.
Yeah, I think it's first of all, saving is different from the investment. So China has been we may call over-saving countries. So they need to encourage the consumptions. But investment rate was not that high as the saving because they also invest abroad. But anyway, so then my point is the productivity of investment is more important than the volume of the investment. So China's case, obviously, problem is the investment was allocated to the more toward to the real estate sectors, housing sectors, and also social, the state-owned enterprises. So productivity was very low. There are many data showing that the misallocation of the investment. So let's say whether if Chinese government should decide whether decrease investment or reallocate investment to more productive sectors, I would say reallocation would be more important.
But you actually said the rate of return on investment was declining.
Oh, return has been declining.
Anyway,
yes, of course. So it's the return has been declining. The reason is basically not just the saving or investment has been too high, but it goes to the unproductive sectors. So especially the one topic has been raised is the rate of return of investment by state-owned enterprise is much lower than the private sector. And also now they are giving more constraint on the private enterprises that will hurt the rate of return to the investment. So this is the reallocation. Of course, still they need to improve the consumption. So I'm not really saying that they should increase the investment more. Basically, the way in the simulation is because all this data, this simulation scenario is coming from the optimal decision. So basically, it should decline. Even alternative scenario, it should be declined. Current level is too high, but only decline speed will be low. So that's the alternative assumption. I never here put the investment rate has been increasing from current level.
Can I just also ask anyone online, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat and then I'll raise it with Jong-Wha. So I've got Hal and I've got Ligon. Hal.
Jong-Wha, thank you very much. Amazing amount of information you've collected. I'm still trying to absorb it. The basic argument, as I understand it, is Asia has grown faster because of better policy, in some sense. I think that's the bottom line in looking back, I think, isn't it? So where do the better policies come from? You mentioned institutions in a couple of places. I wonder if you could just unpack that a little bit, because that seems to be the central underpinning of your story. I mean, there is an argument somehow we don't fully understand it, but
Okay, so
Asian societies somehow expected rising living standards and expected governments, whatever form, authoritarian or democratic, to deliver the kind of policies, you know, the ones you listed, the macro and the openness, human capital.
I
It's a virtuous circle,
yeah.
emulating other countries.
That's a good question. I may put in this way, because when I try to explain the past performance, high performance of Asian countries, basically I emphasize the contribution made by four growth factors. So four growth factors, basically the human resources, it has a demographic dividend. It's not driven by the government, just naturally happen due to the fertility and everything. And then the capital accumulation rate of return was higher at the beginning, especially supported by, but that also supported by government. That's the economic reform and opening, export trade strategy. So, and also the technology productivity growth, that's also related to this reallocation of resources, but also purely on the investment in the technology improvement. As you can see, the Korea's case, semiconductors or automobiles and this kind of what's been important. So let's combine all together. Then that helped. But some of them was helped by the government, but some of the government policy, some helped by just naturally caused by the convergence phenomena and also by the market forces. So issue here is that from here to move to forward, basically this convergence power or the natural decline of the growth rate, let's say, dominate this baseline scenario. How you could change it? You cannot just leave it to the market. Let me put it this way. So you need to do something. So that's we are not really getting into the details of okay, this policy is good for. In this paper, basically showing that generally, if you really improving the TFP growth, technology progress, it would be most important one to Asian countries, especially the China and India. So is that answering your questions?
Partially, but it's an impossibly broad question, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to get a sense.
Yeah.
Maybe later.
So which part we may get to the which part, but here basically another important one is how to prevent the negative impact coming from the globally. So that's also important. So.
And then Timo.
Thank you very much, Jong-Wha. Very useful to have a long-term projection to see the future trajectory of the Asian economy. You have reached a very important conclusion from your study. That is the aging society, the aging won't dictate the future trajectory of the Asian economy, which again, that's a big conclusion because we see the aging happening in Japan, Korea, and now in China. And how come? And people immediately ask. So I was thinking about you when you presented the chart, the data table to show the inputs of the factor production of capital, labor, and the TFP. So really, in Japan's case, labor growth is negative, but the TFP is 100%, more than 100%. So can we guarantee, the productivity will continue to generate those kind of momentum in making contribution to growth when against all this, the aging society, especially China, Japan, and South Korea. So that's why, in that sense, I think your point, the policy suggestion for regional economic cooperation is so important because the aging is happening mainly in Northeast Asia, not happening in South Asia, at least now, and not happening in Southeast Asia, India, South Asia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and all this. So if the cooperation can be enhanced, somehow the aging society in Northeast Asia can be offset by the the young population in South Asia and Southeast Asia. So if that is the case, perhaps that underline your conclusion. But if not is the case, well, we don't know. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Yes, the paper actually just go to individual countries' policies. For example, China, South Korea, and Japan need to utilize more female labor and improve the elderly people's labor force participation rate. I mean, that's trying to. But you are absolutely right. because the even though I emphasize the regional corporations, I didn't really get into this point. You're absolutely right. Trying to use the labor force from the other countries and how to improve the labor mobility among the Asian countries would be very important for Asian countries for future growth. That may answer the Paul's point. We need a specific policy. Okay, so this one may be good policy. Okay.
So, I just want to jump in here though, this issue of opening up the economy, like increasing labour supply through allowing more women to enter the workforce. An alternative is to open up your international trade, to have embodied labour come through goods markets, or to open up international capital markets to get the capital to flow. But you're shutting off those two mechanisms, right? You don't have international trade, you don't have capital flows in your model. So you're sort of narrowing the policy options somewhat in the analysis. So I just encourage you to think through the sort of linkages between countries. We see that in China now with capital being pulled out of the Chinese economy. They're relocating their industry or their production networks to Vietnam and other countries. And so this is going to affect the growth of K, because the K is now being grown, but it's been grown through the Belt Road Initiative as well as through other direct investments.
Yes, that's good. Also good point.
Okay, I've got Timo next, and then Murray, and then Jenny.
Thanks. You showed that chart with the comparison of the growth rates between China and Korea and Japan, suggesting that it's following a similar path. Of course, Korea and Japan are rich countries now. China is not yet a rich country. You do some average per capita terms. It somehow suggests a kind of inevitability that China is eventually also going to be as rich as Japan and Korea. But is that really true? Because there's some other countries, some of the tiger countries, Malaysia, for example, which grew very quickly, but then entered something which people make a billion on trap or so, where they really struggled with that structural transformation from a quick catch up. You're far away from the frontier to restructuring your economy to getting closer to the frontier, which is essentially, I guess, a shift from capital accumulation towards TFP growth and innovation. Do you see a scenario where China really gets stuck in this kind of middle income trap where it does not, where it can't proceed beyond for a while?
Okay, that's a very important question. Let me carefully answer. Usually, I put in this way. If we look at the all historical patterns, many countries who stopped at the middle income without going to further to the higher income, usually they got the crisis, and then they have never recovered from the crisis, or they recovered, but their permanent growth path was much lower than before. That's like many Latin American countries. And then also another issue is the technological upgrading was very slow. There was whole new industries are moving to the one direction, but they may just remain in the traditional sectors like agricultural sectors or light manufacturing without really improving their technology. So I usually don't buy that there is a certain number of the income the country cannot overcome and then just collapse there. There might be that kind of things could exist, but China could pass it. But China may get into the crisis, financial crisis or economic crisis, and not be recovered, and then could get into the situation that this industrial structural issues, rural and urban gaps could hurt the economy, or there may some other countries, so political instability could come, and that the country cannot really go to the strong growth path. We cannot really deny the possibility. Usually, my argument is that even when I was even 20 years ago, some people say, okay, China will collapse in the certain period. Someone I know, some eminent scholars say, always over the 10 years, China will get into the middle income track. But China is already past, I guess, middle income, and then getting into the high income status. So it depends on how you define. So even though I cannot deny the possibility, my basic scenario is that China can overcome current situations, and then but they cannot avoid this slowdown of the growth rate. I may not be surprised the growth rate really get to the 2 or 3% for a while, but they may recover from that to get back to the 4 or 5% growth path. we can discuss further, but why I think so. But I think it's I'm not very much minority on that issue. So China has still kind of capacity to overcome this coming crisis. Except we really think the US-China conflict will really explode to the certain level, and then something happened in Taiwan, and then so kind of things, as you can see, the Russia, so many unpredictable event for them. So purely economic situation may not really see the China stopped in the certain stage, even though I know Chinese government are worried about the possibility.
Yeah, this is an excellent presentation. So my question is about China. So when you project the economic growth of China or compare China with Japan and Korea's past, I think one important factor which you don't cover today, but in my view is very important, is the uncertainty of political system. The uncertainty of political system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So compared to democracies, the Western countries and also Korea and Japan, the uncertainty in politics is really, really high in a democratic system like China. China's success in the past 4 decades is highly attributed to the political, the government relaxing control on economic activities. Now, in the past decade, and the Chinese government is becoming increasingly autocratic. And so when you do this convergent analysis, you basically assume that the institutional quality remain relatively stable, right?
Yes.
But if you look at what happened in China in the last, for example, 5 years, as the Chinese, it's really depressing to see what the Chinese government do to stupid things, economic policy, including this housing crisis, including the local government debt, and also including the stock market crisis in last month, and also the stupid regulation on the IT industry, on education training industries. So my question is, how should when we do this projection in this sort of autocratic system, how should I handle this the uncertainty of political system?
Well, I'm not a good person to discuss this political situation. I want to just say a couple of things. First of all, economic literature says whether democracy or authoritarian systems would be good or bad for long-term economic growth. That's very ambiguous, because they say the political stability or avoiding war is very important for economic growth. So in that sense, China was very good at maintaining political stability over such a long period. And then whether they're going to another issues, their government policy towards the private sector, how would be important? I mean, China did well, privatizing markets and then promoting the markets over time. But now it has been some changes. So how we assess the policy? People know this may not really good for the, especially technology innovation, because if you didn't really encourage the new investors in this area, so we'll see. And whether this will be the big challenge for China, really using the government power to promote the new technology. So it's a completely different system compared to the United States or more successful countries. So there will be significant challenges for that. I mean, I can only answer that, and then the other part we can discuss whether this system is good. And I see here some question on the consistent human capital growth from the David Vines. Okay, so I didn't really get into I cut some slides. I'm sorry about that. But human capital growth is if I assuming the educational attainment. So I have some projections on that. Basically, many countries, educational attainment, especially in East Asian countries, will decline, or the growth rate will decelerate because they were strong investment. Now is the rate of return has been declined. That's the baseline scenario. So, for example, Korea's case is the per year human capital, the quality of labor improved by 0.7% point, but now is it will decline in the baseline. But consistent alternative is consistent human capital growth is will maintain that growth rate over the next 7 decades. I'm not assuming that will increase, but so it gives some. And then you said you didn't see the conclusion other part. Okay, you put it.
Oh, I've
Thank
actually-
you, Wally.
Yeah, actually, I have to share the screen again, so it's too.
Oh, okay, so it's about this how to avoid this global geoeconomic fragmentation is important to Asia, and then the strengthening regional integration and cooperation would be good for Asian countries. That was major conclusion.
So let's turn to Jenny, and then I'll get this slide up and share it for David, so
Okay.
he can actually, sure, Cassie,
Jenny?
any questions over, please.
I wanted to understand a bit more about technology, because your projections here are essentially, a standard solar model. So, and you've got assumptions about population growth that come from other sources, and you've got some assumption about growth of capital from, I don't know where, but reasonable that we can pick a number for investment growth. And then, of course, all the action with the solar model comes from the TFP side. And it sounds as if you're dealing with a world in which innovation comes from the West or the United States, and Asia is converging towards some other place which is the source of innovation. Suppose that changes in the next 20 years and Asia becomes a real source of new technologies, innovation, different ways of doing things. I'm just wondering what your view is about that and how that would change what you're saying about the future for Asia.
Thank you very much for asking the question. Actually, that's the whole part of the paper. Basically, for Asian countries, I'm not really assuming they are just imitating the foreign technology from the United States. That's driven by the technology gap between Asian countries and the United States. So that part coming from here, and then I also assume let's speak for the China. So China case, their own innovation. So this innovation part is also decreasing return to scale. So the question is that I'm not really in this paper, or just the future agenda, how we could calibrate. The only thing I divided here is the China's case. Let me explain the conclusion. Is half is coming from the innovation, half is coming from the imitation. But the innovation is driven by the human resources. It's basically R&D. You don't have R&D personnel, but basically the human resources also keeping your market size. That's the theory says. So even though basically I showed the solo accounting, the model is endogenous. In a way, the TFP is driven by endogenously. There are other factors. So here, basically, innovation part is also declining over time. There is several papers, recent papers, even in United States, innovation has been declining because the rate of return to the innovation, R&D spending has been declined over the past couple of years. So there are controversial issues, even though we see the very significant product in the technological advanced, but the overall US technology has been declining in terms of growth rate. Growth rate has been decelerating. So here we also assume this innovation equation will follow the US part. So US has only innovation part, the other countries will combine together.
And is that essentially a sort of Roma endogenous growth? So it has to do with the human capital, going back to David's point, it has to do.
Yeah, so human capital is also in this, yes.
So because human capital is declining, then.
That's also true. Also, labor force is the size of labor, size of population is the market size. So also because even though this model, I said the demography does not really dictate the future. Demography has some impact on the market size. It will have an impact on the rate of return to investment, including R&D investment. That's in the model. But we are not really calibrating China is just trying to make the all Asian countries as some kind of using the role model.
Well, on that, John-Wha, your timing is perfect. I think David looks happy. I think you answered his question. Yeah. David, thank you very much for a great presentation. I can see why you're an eminent professor.
Oh, thanks very much.
An eminent professor. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, and thank you all for coming and look forward to seeing you at the next Karma or Crawford event. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.